Good evening. No one looks forward to the first day back at work after Christmas, but for MPs returning to Parliament, Brexit hostilities resumed more vicious than ever, particularly over the threat of a no deal. With the postponed vote in Parliament on the Prime Minister's deal now expected a week tomorrow, opponents accused her of trying to run down the clock to blackmail MPs into accepting what her so-called botched deal. Tonight, Mrs May has been trying again to win over some of her fiercest Brexit critics without, it seems, much success.
Can you be one around?
Dry January didn't last long in Downing Street. This evening, Conservative and DUP MPs were invited to a drinks reception at number 10 as the Prime Minister tries to win support for her Brexit deal with a charm offensive. But on his way out, Boris Johnson said there hadn't been much of a sales pitch.
There wasn't even a speech. There were no speeches. There was no discussion of any kind. It was
no persuasion.
There was no attempt to persuade anybody, and I don't really think that things have really changed.
Which means Mrs May's deal still doesn't have the support it needs to get through Parliament.
As things
stand, you can't vote for her.
Well, no, certainly not as things stand at the moment. No, absolutely, because the backstop is clearly something that is unacceptable, not just to us, but to many MPs across the House.
Earlier in the day, the Prime Minister indicated that she did have a plan to turn that around.
We'll be setting out measures which will be specific to Northern Ireland. We'll be setting out proposals for a greater role for Parliament as we move into the next stage of the negotiations. And we're continuing to work on further assurances, on further undertakings from the European Union in relation to the concern that's been expressed by parliamentarians.
But in case that fails, there's some very visible no-deal planning going on. The government had 89 drivers take their trucks in and out of a deserted airfield near Dover today to test traffic flows in case no deal causes delays at the port. Some hauliers thought it was unrealistic.
Honestly, it doesn't truly reflect on the day when you've got thousands of vehicles that are stranded, drivers are upset, local motorists, local businesses, they want to get there. It's not going to truly reflect what could happen. So today was obviously a bit of a pointless exercise.
In Westminster, as protesters gathered outside Parliament, inside, MPs were plotting new ways to stop no deal. Labour and Tory rebels joining forces tomorrow to try and stop the government spending money on no deal without asking Parliament.
I think Parliament should have a vote on that, and that's what this amendment is about, making sure that Parliament have a vote and that Parliament can rule out no deal because of the damage that it would cause.
And another former minister joined the ranks of those supporting a second referendum.
So if there is deadlock in Parliament, which there is, then it may be that the best way forward is to get the people back into the process via a fresh referendum with a new set of questions.
But isn't that betraying the democratic mandate of the first referendum when people said, if you vote for Brexit, it'll be delivered?
Well, we've got a deal. People, if you have a fresh referendum, people can still do that.
But the debate is now getting so heated, it is occasionally boiling over.
Why are you doing that, Anna?
The Conservative MP Anna Soubry today surrounded and barracked by protesters, some with links to the far right. This evening, the Metropolitan Police said they were assessing if any crimes had been committed. Carl Dinnan, News at 10, Westminster.
With 81 days to go before Britain leaves the European Union, a busy few weeks of discussions will ensue. Tomorrow, a divided cabinet will meet to try to work out what happens if there is a no deal. On Wednesday, Parliament resumes the debate postponed before Christmas when it was clear the majority of MPs would not back Theresa May's Brexit plan. As MPs continue that debate on Thursday, Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe arrives for talks. They're likely to be dominated by Brexit and future trade between the two countries. There'll be yet more parliamentary debate on Friday, and next week, that all-important, meaningful vote on the withdrawal agreement and Britain's future relationship, dramatically called off last month, will take place at last, probably on Tuesday. And Robert is here. Robert, you've been saying before Christmas and since that we all have to assume that she's going to probably lose that meaningful vote. If that comes to pass, what could happen next?
So let's just quickly go through the process. Later this week, I expect there to be an exchange of letters between the Prime Minister and EU leaders, which will repeat what EU leaders have already said, that they don't want this backstop that Brexitatory MPs hate to be anything more than temporary, but it will not be legally binding. And therefore, I don't think it will persuade her rebels to change her mind. So yes, every minister I talk to says she will lose that vote next week. At that point, they say she faces one of two options. Either go to Parliament and ask MPs what kind of Brexit, or indeed no Brexit, perhaps a referendum MPs would support, or go back to the EU and say this deal won't get through, give me a better deal. Now, the risk of taking the latter strategy, many ministers say to me, is EU won't play ball, the clock ticks down and we end up with a so-called no-deal Brexit, which most MPs, we've seen a sort of semi-poll of them through a letter, hate. So we are still in deadlock. The most extraordinary thing at the moment, most extraordinary thing as far as I'm concerned, is the Prime Minister will not tell her own ministers what she's going to do as and when she loses that vote. So extraordinary.
Extraordinary, as you say, but also at the same time, as MPs returned to Parliament today, the level of intimidation that some MPs around Westminster have been facing, we saw that in Carl's report, has reached, well, some would say new heights. Is that becoming a real concern, do you think?
Look, one gets the sense that the country in general is getting very tense about where we are on Brexit, and we did see some really ugly scenes today with the senior, actually Remain supporting MP, Anna Soubry, being accused of being a Nazi, being surrounded by very angry men in a way that many MPs said looked like a threat to her safety. Now, I said that I thought on Twitter today that this was not the way we should be treating each other. People, lots of them, immediately said, well, that just shows your Brexit bias. This is nuts, right? Yeah. We are in a position where people have to behave decently to each other and recognise that this is a debate about very important policy, but not something that we should abuse each other about.
Indeed. Robert, thank you very much indeed.